Okay, here's the topic: restoring and transforming the ancient Jewish New Year for animals. Idea whose time has come, and I have a little bit of a PowerPoint. It's such a super important topic. And just a little bit about me. I'm Professor Emeritus of Mathematics, College of Staten Island, President Emeritus of Jewish Veg. That was formerly Jewish Vegetarians of North America when Jonathan started it. And a number of books, and just a couple that are relevant here. Judaism, Vegetarianism, that's the third edition, actually. First edition in 1982, showing I've been involved for more than 40 years, and presentation is based on that. More recently, Vegan Revolution, Saving Our World, Revitalizing Judaism, more about that later. And just a little bit about the ancient Jewish New Year for animals that we're trying to restore and transform. It's one of the 4 Jewish New Years that's in Rosh Hashanah, Mishad 1-1. And I want to wish everybody Shana Tova, since that is a new year, and Chag Sameach. And that's just right today, Rosh Chodesh Elul, months before Rosh Hashanah, trying to look over our deeds, do repentance, improve, become better Jews. So an ideal time to consider our behavior toward animals and how to improve it. Initially, it was tithing for sacrifices in the days of the Jewish temple, destroyed in 70 in the Common Era by the Romans, so no longer need for sacrifices. So this is one idea with many others before me during this time, trying to restore the ancient Jewish New Year holiday. And this is the important thing, to transform it far away from the tithing into a day devoted to increasing awareness of Jewish compassionate teachings about animals and how far current realities are from these teachings. And again, there's a precedent. There's another New Year for trees, Tu B'Shvat. That was initially like a tax day, tithing for trees, and it's now sort of a Jewish Environmental Earth Day, and that's one of those 4 New Years that we mentioned. Okay, and because of this, last summer I had this book published, Pictures of a Little Disorder, because I made it fill the whole page, and it's Restoring and Transforming the Ancient Jewish New Year for Animals. And hopefully an idea whose time has come. And about a year ago, I had another one of these webinars on this topic sponsored by HSEAM, and the same idea, how to transform that ancient Jewish New Year. And many reasons for this, but I'm going to focus on climate change, the biggest threat to humanity today, and show how shifts to veganism are essential to avert a climate catastrophe. And there's a strong scientific consensus. 97% of climate scientists, all of the major science academies that have taken a position, and most important, thousands of peer-reviewed articles in respected science journals, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the most important group, of course, that involves climate experts from many countries. They said in 2018, we may only have till 2030 to make unprecedented changes to have a chance to avert a climate catastrophe. Unfortunately, carbon dioxide has been increasing, and here it is showing it for 2022. And most important, the temperature's been going up. This line is the average for the 20th century. Below it, beginning and much higher over here. The last 8 years are the 8 hottest years in recorded history. And because of that, heat waves increasing, and the introduction we were talking about before, some of the effects now. Every decade has been hotter than the previous decade since the 1970s. Every year in this century is in the top 24 hottest years. And June 2023, the hottest June ever. July was the hottest single month ever in recorded history. And as you've probably seen on TV, Phoenix, Arizona, 31 consecutive days, 110 degrees Fahrenheit or hotter. I don't know how they can bear it. Here in Israel, it's been in the 90s, and it's unbearable. So the glaciers are melting, the polar ice caps are melting. By the way, this is part of a much longer presentation, so I'm going pretty fast, but hope you get the idea. Greenland's melting, and that could cause many feet rise if that happens. Many animals endangered. The polar bears are threatened. Permafrost is melting, and there's many, like methane, other greenhouse gases underneath. If they're released, that could be very dangerous. The seas are rising. Even sunny day flooding occurring already in cities. on the coast of Miami, Florida, and Israel was especially threatened, and it could lose large parts of its coastline, like the and that coastal plain contains a good deal of the population and the infrastructure. Well, again, very fast. Floods are increasing, droughts are increasing, and the thing is, with all that's bad, it's likely to get much worse, unfortunately, because of what they call self-reinforcing positive feedback loops. And for example, Jonathan was mentioning the wildfires in Maui and Hawaii. And there's three reasons here. The destroyed trees, of course, they were sinks. They were sequestering carbon dioxide no more once they're burned. Carbon is emitted into the atmosphere from these burned trees, and much energy was required. So many homes destroyed, so many cars destroyed. So that's why the climate experts are warning us we may reach an irreversible tipping point somewhere in the future if this continues. And unfortunately, we are now at 1.2 degrees Celsius above the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and we've already reached that. And we see all the things I just showed you, the droughts and floods and everything increasing. And look at this, they're projecting by the end of the century at least 3. And it could be as much as 4, 5, 6, or even more. So this could be an existential threat to humanity. Everything possible has to be done. And so what are the experts saying? Certainly we have to go to renewable on solar, and the price of this decreased sharply, which is good news. Wind power, but there's a famous elephant in the room, or more importantly, the cow in the room that's being forgotten, because the number one cause of this climate catastrophe is animal-based agriculture, because so many trees have been cut down. Used to be 6 trillion, now about half of that is 3 trillion in the Amazon, etc. And here it is, a very important statistic. Over 40% of the ice-free land in the world used for grazing and growing feed crops for animals. And because, and again, here it is, 3/4 of the farmland, only a quarter here for the broccoli and the cauliflower and carrots, 3/4 of the land here for animal agriculture. Previous forests being cut down. And because of that, this is like probably the most important graph I'll be showing. This is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The experts believe that 350 parts per million is like a threshold for climate sustainability. We are now, I was at about 420, and it's increasing by 2 or 3 parts per million every single year. We're heading in the wrong direction, and it has to drop back down somehow to that 350, and we're going to talk about that later, in order to have the possibility of a sustainable planet. Okay, so here it is. That's 3/4. If that could be reforested, sequester much of that carbon dioxide, what a difference that could make. Okay, however, as it sees here, 12-year high, Amazon's still being cut down. We're literally eating ourselves to extinction. So here's the key question. What kind of world will we leave for future generations? I've been blessed since moving to Israel in 2016. 4 grandchildren getting married, birth of 6 great-grandchildren. What kind of world are we leaving them? And this is it. The choice between a mainly vegan world and a destroyed world. And the saying is, the slogan of the vegetarian vegan movements and the peace movement should be one and the same. All we're saying, with apologies to John Lennon, give peace a chance. So this is the bottom line. There's no planet B nor any effective plan B other than to really shift toward a vegan world. Now, because of that, I have an article recently arguing that eating meat and other animal products today is really halakhically unjustified. Jerusalem Post says they'll publish that if I can get a rabbi to write a rebuting kind of article. I've been trying like crazy. No rabbi is willing to do that. What does that say about eating animals? And this is part of it. I had a cover story in the Jerusalem Post. Could Jews be vegans? Again, offering many chances to respond. Basically, nobody did. So I want to briefly, because this is super urgent, why should rabbis agree and point out that eating meat and other animal products is doing halachically unjustified? 6 important reasons, 6 mandates in Judaism, all very seriously violated by animal-based diets: protecting our health, treating animals with compassion, protecting the environment, conserving natural resources, producing hunger, pursuing peace. Try going and go fast, perhaps have a chance to show the 45-minute version. But we have excellent panels, excellent speakers, so I want to give them time. Okay, so I'm going to go very, very briefly over these 6 mandates. What are the Jewish teachings and how far are they being very seriously violated? Animal-based diet. Most important mitzvah, perhaps, taking care of our health. Deuteronomy, not long ago, read in the synagogue. The Nishmat Hemli Old and After Him, we should very diligently guard our health, according to the sages. Of course, the important concept, Pikuach Nefesh, Jewish man do everything possible to save the human life. It overrides every single mitzvah except the 3 cardinal sins: murder, sexual immorality, and idolatry. And this I know is hard to see, but this is the bottom line. The more meat in the diet, the more heart disease, the more bowel cancer, the more all kinds of diseases. Far less meat, notice how much smaller heart disease, how much smaller bowel cancer. That's the bottom line. It's really medical malpractice, doctors can tell people. And consistent with Bereshit chapter 1, verse 29, that God's first dietary regimen, we are far from structure from the carnivorous and omnivorous animals. Look at our teeth, a little bit different than that of a carnivorous animal, even an omnivorous animal. Our hands certainly far from the sharp, hard, long diet, the teeth of the carnivorous animal. And our intestinal system is far longer, great for absorbing the minerals and vitamins of fruits and vegetables, but not so good with meat. And just a couple of other things on the health issue. We know how terrible the coronavirus has been, very likely causing a wet market in China like this. Many other pandemics caused by animal agriculture. And also one other health important issue, antibiotic resistance building up. There's more than half the antibiotics used in this country fed to animals to fatten them up and also resist diseases. Okay, Jewish teaching compassion for animals is certainly very important. On the day they wanted to restore the ancient Jewish New Year for animals, Jews ought to be Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, compassionate children of compassionate ancestors, emulating his God whose compassion is over all God's works. That's in the book of Psalms, Ashrei, we cite it 3 times every single day in the synagogue services. Proverbs, righteous person considers the lives of his or her animals. But, and here's some specific, due to time, we how to feed animals or pets, for example, before sending down to our own meals. And on Shabbat, animals are to rest also, and that's part of the 10 Commandments recited on Shabbat mornings. But what are the realities? Chickens in cages so small they can't even raise a wing, very frustrated, all the natural instincts thwarted, tend to peck at each other, cause harm. Instead of changing the terrible conditions, the very painful process to be beat, and without any painkiller at all. Male chicks even suffer worse, not even one day. They can't, of course, lay eggs, so they haven't been genetically programmed to have much meat. So they should be ground up like this, maybe as pet food, or put into a bag to suffocate. And a horrible picture, but dairy cows are artificially inseminated every single year. What the industry itself calls rape brats. And what's even terrible, their babies are taken away right a bit. It's very traumatic, of course, for both. Again, moving along, environmental teachings were one that's very often misinterpreted. Humans are given dominion, but the sages interpret that as responsible stewardship, responsible guardianship. And the proof of that is Genesis 2:15, that indicates the human being was put into Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, to work the land or to guard it. So we should be partners, co-workers with God in protecting the environment. And many negatives due to factors like 8 billion people just hit, but about 80 billion animals, deforestation, soil erosion, depletion, most important, climate change, which we've talked about, so we'll move on. The fourth mandate, Baal Tashkit, conservation of resources, again in Deuteronomy, you shall not waste nor destroy, and this indicates that even in wartime, we are not to cut down fruit-bearing trees to build a battering ram to try to overcome an enemy fortification. However, animal-based diets are very, very wasteful. One example can take as much cost of irrigation on the feed crops of animals as much as 13 times as much water for an animal-based diet than on a vegan diet. Okay, moving along to Judaism, powerful teachings on hunger, and share of bread with Isaiah, share of bread with the hungry, that's Isaiah, in the powerful words in the Yom Kippur Haftarah, and read the corners of the fields, the gleanings of a harvest for the poor. Powerful teachings, but the reality is far from it again, the scandal of world hunger, and there would be enough food to feed every person with a lot left over. But for example, 70% of the grain produced in the U.S. is fed to animals destined for slaughter. And what makes that even more shameful, we take healthy foods like corn and soy and oats, and they are high in fiber and healthy complex carbohydrates, feed them to animals, and again, and they're very high in cholesterol and saturated fat. We feed these healthy foods to animals and we get just the opposite characteristics, very unhealthy meat and other animal products. And a vegan diet would shift the world away from this hunger. Jewish teachings on peace, again, Psalm, seek peace and pursue it. Again, important things, only peace and justice that we're told to pursue. And of course, Israelis went to war at times, but there's always a prophetic dream from Isaiah and Micha as well. Nations shall do their swords into plowshare, their spears into pruning hooks, the prophetic dream. We're nearing the end. Okay, so the sages saw the Hebrew word for lechem, bread, and milchama, a war come from the same root. From that they deduced that when there's a shortage of grain and other resources, people are more likely to go to war. And of course, that's been seen in history. And here we have it, by the way, good example of peace on earth. And here again, peace on earth. And again, a quick summary. And these are the 6. We've gone through all of these reasons very strong, and why rabbis should come out strongly against this. And I've been pushing this and writing articles. Okay, taking care of our health, treat animals with compassion, protect the environment, serve natural resources, reduce hunger, pursue peace. And again, we have a choice in a mainly vegan world and a destroyed world. And this is right outside my door. This is the idea. We have to push this more and more. People have to go vegan. Here I am many years ago speaking at some kind of conference, special tie with all kinds of fruits on it. And here, again, this is the shirt. Probably can't see it now, but it's vegan, giving many of the reasons for that. My stick fruit tie and investment tie. And I tell people, most important, I'm wearing fruit of the loom underwear. And it's much easier to be a vegan today because so many substitutes. And they say that it has the appearance, texture, and taste so close to the meat and other animal products that even long-time meat eaters can't tell the difference. Okay, moving along. Okay, so anyway, went way over time. And I'm telling people to maybe speak for 6 minutes or so, but I thought this is the most important issue. Thanks for watching. And as I mentioned before, be happy to send my recent book, Vegan Revolution, Saving the World, Revitalizing Judaism, that all will contact me. It's an easy, just remember, Veggie and Rich. And okay, I guess that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And okay, now then we have a super panel, and I'm going to start introducing some of the wonderful people who'll be speaking. And again, I apologize for the length of that and going fast on it, but I hope it indicated the two bottom lines that the world's heading toward a climate catastrophe. And unless there's a major shift for plant-based diets, there's no way we are going to avert a climate catastrophe. So our first speaker, Rabbi Akiva Gersh, and he is a vegan rabbi, and I've had the pleasure of taking a 6-session course, heard him speak many times, and really doing great work in presenting the vegan case. And recently he was on a speaking tour in the U.S. and he set up like a dating kind of service. So super work and pleasure. So Rabbi Akiva Gersh, you are on as our first speaker.
Okay, thank you so much, Richard. Really great to be here with you and all the other wonderful speakers and great participants. It's an honor to be here. Just to share for a few minutes is obviously so much to say, but just for a few minutes, I just want to touch on one or two topics. One being, is eating animals today justified by Judaism? Right. Again, there's lots to say about the topic, but I'll just say that it's very clear. I think it should be clear that there's no obligation to eat animals in Judaism. There is a discussion and even a debate among some of the poskim, the rabbinic authorities, whether it's a mitzvah to eat meat on Yom Tov today. That's a big, somewhat complicated discussion that we're not going to get into right now. But the bottom line, I think we can say for our purposes here, is that there's no obligation, right? Even people, when I say people, I mean rabbis. Well, they'll say it's a mitzvah, but it's not an obligation. I know that sounds kind of funny because oftentimes we think of the word mitzvah meaning obligation, but it doesn't always mean that. But we live in a time, and we have been living in a time for a very long time, since the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem almost 2,000 years ago, that there's no obligation to eat meat. And even back then, the only obligation that there was to eat meat was in the temple in Jerusalem from certain sacrifices. So even back then, it was very, very limited. Even back then, when there were sacrifices in Jerusalem, the amount of meat that people ate that was obligatory meat, right, was so few and far between, such a small, tiny little amount. And again, in our day and age today, there is no obligation. So when we see what is happening to our world as a result of an animal-based diet, the pain and suffering caused to animals, the added destruction to the environment, the negative impact on human health, the spiritual issues, which is a whole nother thing also that we're not going to get into, we can't help but think that Judaism today, in our day and age, applying the ancient teachings of the Jewish tradition to the modern situation that we're in right now, would absolutely say that the best way to eat, the best diet to follow, is one that does not include the foods that are coming out of these industries, the meat, the dairy, the eggs, and the fish, because of what they're doing to creation and to God's creatures, the laws that they're breaking along the way. So put that all together, there's no obligation to eat animals, okay, together with the way that they are getting food products from the raising of animals today in the modern day industrial, globalized, factory farm world, is breaking Torah laws, right? Like what Richard said, right? Again, like we talk about, Tzar Ba'alei Chaim, not causing unnecessary pain and suffering to animals, Bal Tashchit, not wasting valuable resources, right? Shmirat Haguf, right? Guarding our health. So there's so many arguments in favor of eating foods that don't come from these industries, that don't support these industries. And, I've seen many articles and many percentages. I've seen, it said 99% of the animal products that people are eating are coming from factory farms. Someone recently argued with me, it's only 90% in certain countries. Okay, fine, whatever you want to say, 90%, 99%. The fact is that to find animal-based products that are coming from places that are not these factory farm industries is very, very difficult, very, very rare, and most people are not even thinking about it. All right, so that's one thing. Maybe with the 1 minute that I have left is answering or at least touching on the question: should Jews be vegans or at least vegetarians? And I think that very much so, obviously, but it ties into the essential message and mission and vision of the Jewish tradition, one that we've been carrying with us for over 3,000 years. And that's the idea that we are here to improve the world. We are here to fix the brokenness of the world. And there's many problems and there's lots of different kinds of brokenness in the world. And there's many things that we can do. There's many choices we can make and changes we can make in our lives today to help heal a lot of that brokenness. But I believe that by changing our food choices towards a vegan diet in one swoop, right, impacts positively and helps heal so many of the brokenness, so many of the types of brokenness in a world in one kind of, within one kind of decision. Right? By changing our diets, by making food choices that are more in line with the values of our tradition of animal welfare, protection of the environment, human health, right? We are able to have such a vast and far-reaching positive impact on the world and really bring that central vision of Judaism, of Tikkun Olam, of fixing the world, of bettering ourselves, bettering the world, caring about God's creation, keeping God in mind in all of our ways and all of our decisions in such a powerful and substantial way. So that's my last thought, right? I think veganism is very much in line with the values and the vision and the mission of Judaism. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see more of it in our days.
Okay, Toda Rabah, an excellent presentation. And I'm going to thank you a little bit. I know that Sarah Chandler has some time restraints, so I'm going to call on Sarah to be the next speaker. And let's see, she has quite a resume. She's a Brooklyn-born Jewish educator, artist, activist, healer, and poet. Teaches, writes, and consults on issues related to Judaism, earth-based spiritual practices, respectful working and farming, and she serves as a Chief Compassion Officer of Jewish Institutions for Animals, an initiative for animals, and she's the director of the earth-based spiritual practices at her own Isabel Friedman Jewish Retreat Center. So, Sarah Chandler, I want to apologize, by the way, I invited more than a dozen women to be speakers, and unfortunately, all had other obligations, or some just didn't respond. So we tried to get many more women, but Sarah will be representing them, I guess. So Sarah, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's, to me, is a very holy day, Rosh Chodesh LaBahema, New Year for Animals. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity to observe this holiday with all of you by having this Zoom and having this conversation. I've been thinking a lot about our roles as whether we're vegans, vegetarians, compassionate meat reductionists, or just food ethics activists and educators, and what our role should be. Is our role to work within existing non-Jewish or secular or multi-faith organizations? Is our role to be the best we can be as a solo person? Maybe we live in a household and we're the only person that's making these ethical food choices that we want other people we live with to make. Is our role to go be an activist, and the Jewish part is kind of in the background, but it's not as essential to our objectives. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I see my role as, and hopefully some of the examples that I'll give will be meaningful and impactful for each of you. I really see, so I have so many wonderful colleagues on this call, and I really see each of us as not needing to have the same role, but also us working together in the ecosystem of supporting the animals, supporting the planet, supporting each other. I'll tell you a story, which is that just last week, I was at the Pearlstone Retreat Center down in Reisterstown, Maryland. And this is a beautiful, beautiful Jewish kosher retreat center. It's been there for about 20 years. And they have literally thousands of people coming there every month. And one of the things that's really special about being at Pearlstone is it's this beautiful area. And also they have a farm. They grow vegetables and fruit, and they have a huge orchard. And they also have farm animals at the farm. And you can go on a retreat there and never even notice the farm animals. Or if you're like me, every time you have a free moment, you can go and talk to the animals and see them and see how cute they are. And maybe some of you have done that and been in a similar setting. And I bet some of you have also had the experience of being in a place like that and feeling, not so good. Like, what's going on with these animals? Why are they here? Are they here for food? Are they here for entertainment? Do they have enough space to walk around? Do they have enough medical care? And really having concern for animals that are in let's say, an educational farm space. And I want to just lift up the importance of two things. One is actually spending time with animals and that are alive, not just on the plate or down the buffet. And also our ability to speak compassionately and carefully and respectfully when we're sharing space with people who are both eating animals and also, we could say, eating animals where the source of those animal products is either unknown or known to be from factory farms. And I want to really lift up the Pearlstone Center because, it's not a huge farm. It is a working farm, but the animals, they have a very, very small number of animals. And though the farmers there do interact with the animals and occasionally do eat the animals, mostly they're there for educational purposes. And, one of the things that's really special about being at this retreat center is they serve a lot of vegetables. And so when you go on the buffet line, it's not just a kind of wilty salad at one end, but there sometimes will be meals with 5 different trays of different roasted vegetables. And they'll even say on the tray, this is from the farm. And it'll say also if it's vegan. And we love that. We love high quality food labeling when vegans are sharing spaces with everyone else. And something that was interesting that came up, even though there was such really, really clear labeling on the buffet of what was from the farm in terms of the vegetables, they served eggs for breakfast every single day. And this is very, very common, whether we're going to a hotel, a conference center, a restaurant. You say breakfast, of course we're serving eggs. That's the default thing. Breakfast equals eggs. If I were to try to write an emoji for the word breakfast, it would show me some eggs on a plate. And one thing that was interesting being on this buffet, that's, people make a lot of small talk on the buffet, and we're talking huge trays of eggs. We're not just talking like a few here and there. Someone on the line said, oh, wow, I bet these are from the farm, because we're at a farm. So of course these eggs are from the farm. And I was able to say to them, do you know how many eggs a chicken lays a week in August, which is not the same, by the way, as in the winter? And the person didn't know, because guess what? They get food from stores and they don't really think about where their food comes from. And and I said, each chicken lays about 5 eggs a week. There would need to be the same number of chickens as there are people eating eggs for us to have the amount of eggs that we're eating here at this retreat center. And though it would be really special to have that scale of a farm for other reasons, educational reasons, I was able to point out to them that, here we are at this beautiful place, this kosher retreat center. And even here, the capacity they would need to have enough chickens to feed enough number of people are eating eggs it was so big that they just wouldn't do it. And in my work at Jewish Initiative for Animals, one of the things we actually did was we worked with Jewish overnight camps and other kosher retreat centers, including Isabella Friedman, to reduce the amount of eggs that they were serving. Instead of just saying default, of course, we have to have eggs every day, but to still serve eggs a few days a week, and then to have oatmeal, to have vegetables, oh my gosh, vegetables for breakfast, to have tofu scramble. I had a delicious tofu scramble, both at Isabella Friedman and Pearlstone in the past month, and to have these other options. And guess what? It also saves money to eat beans for breakfast, to eat grains for breakfast. I personally actually recently bought some rye, and I've been eating rye instead of oats because rye grows even faster and takes fewer resources and is more accessible locally. Most of the oats in my grocery store are from Canada, whereas I can get rye that's from even closer to my house. And thinking about, instead of focusing on the individuals saying, let's just not eat eggs, or the opposite, this problem where people see eggs and they're on a farm and they just assume they're from these 5 happy chickens that are in the yard, being able to talk about it in a compassionate way and to get curious around the person's choices, the retreat center's choices, and of course, the living conditions of those animals. And so I'm really grateful that I get to do retreats at some beautiful places and have these conversations in a way that are compassionate. So instead of telling someone what I think they should be eating, to really say, well, what kind of chickens would you like your eggs to be from? How much space do you think a chicken needs to walk around? And instead of me saying, all eggs are from factory farms, stay far away, when they realize, oh, those chickens really need a lot of space. I'll close with one other piece, which is some other work that I'm working on right now. Is I go to this place called the Park Slope Food Co-op. It is a food co-op in Brooklyn, New York, that's been around for over 40 years. And we sell more groceries than any other single grocery store in all of New York City. And I am on the animal welfare committee of that co-op. And we have started creating a cheese guide of teaching people the source of all of the cheese. And what we've noticed is that every time we talk about the source of the cheese that the co-op sells, and by the way, we sell many delicious vegan cheeses as well, people get really worked up, because once you start saying, well, if it's from the EU, there are these 10 metrics where it's more ethical and better for the animals in the EU, where they don't have those in Wisconsin. And people get really upset because they're like, why isn't that on the package? And so even just being able to communicate these educational things, it actually makes the very specific things about animal welfare, it makes people want to eat either no cheese or at least the more expensive, higher welfare cheese, which ends up meaning less cheese in their grocery cart. So thank you so much for this space to honor the animals. And I'll close just by sharing my little snail friend and saying that, we're mostly talking about farmed animals and our planet. And let's keep in mind all of our sweet little animals that maybe we don't see every day, but that contribute to our food systems and to the balance of our planet. Happy Rosh Chodesh.
Okay, Toda Rabah, and valuable insights and best ways to continue success. Okay, next we will have Rabbi David Seidenberg, and he's the founder and director of a wonderful book called Neo Hasid, author of several books, a lot of articles, especially Kabbalah and Ecology, and that's God's image in the more than human world. So, David, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. As you can hear from my voice, I've been sick. So thank you. I wish I could lead you in a nigun, but it would be actually not possible for me at the moment. I want to start with a story that you might have heard from the Baal Shem Tov, and I'm curious specifically about who's heard this story. That once he was walking with his students, and a wind came and blew a leaf, and it landed on the ground, and he said to his students, look under that leaf. And they looked under it, and there was a worm that was under the leaf, covered, shaded by the leaf. And he said that leaf fell because the worm was suffering from the heat of the sun. And so the Creator took care of it. And that every single thing that happens, every leaf that falls, every worm that crawls, is under hashgacha pratit, under divine guidance. Now that's completely the opposite of what almost all the traditions said before him. It's going to get complicated in a second, though. Who's heard that story? Anyone?
Nope.
Might have heard it.
I've heard a similar statement from Reb Nachman, that every living thing is overseen and protected by the Kadosh Baruch Hu.
So this is different. I'm not sure about how Reb Nachman comes out on this, but let's focus on a few elements of this here. First of all, the Baal Shem Tov did have teachings about worms besides this. He said specifically, and I think this is a fascinating one to bring into the conversation, you shouldn't think how much better you are than a worm, because the worm, with all its strength, serves the Creator and prays to the Creator exactly how it best can, and it knows that it can do it, and you don't even know if you're going to do that. Instead, you should regard, and he says this specifically, all the little creatures as you should regard them as chaverim ba'olam, as friends in the world, meaning friends to you. And it reminds me of the Winnie the Pooh thing about Rabbit and all his friends, who are all the small bugs and animals that follow him around and hang out with the rabbit. In any case, we know that the Baal Shem Tov did say the previous thing, the thing I just said about how we should be chaverim with all the worms and the snails, like the one that Sarah Chandler was reminding us of. But it's not clear whether he said the story about the worm or not. In fact, the more I've researched it, and I've been researching it over the past few months, it seems clear that he did not tell that about the worm. He did not tell that story about the worm. Rather, the Shomer and Munim told that story in the name of the Rishner, that the Rishner was walking with his son and saw a leaf fall and told his son to lift up the leaf and see the worm underneath it. The Baal Shem Tov had a different teaching that we can see in the earlier sources. His teaching was that every leaf that falls and every straw that falls off a wagon or leaf that falls off a tree, it's bahashkacha pratit, by divine guidance. But he didn't say in order to make the worms happy so that they wouldn't get too hot from the sun. That was a later addition. And I want to contrast those two ways of thinking about it. Because in the first way, the way I first told this story, the way it's most commonly known, God is a farbrent animal rights activist, you could say. Like every single animal needs to have its rights met and its needs met. And that's a beautiful idea. But then what about the worm, the bird that eats the worm? I mean, where was God's hashkacha over the worm when the bird eats the worm? What does that mean? It gets kind of thickly complicated and thorny very quickly when you think about it, even just for a few seconds. Rather, the original teaching has this little addendum to it, which says that the reason for hashkacha over every single leaf and piece of straw is because of the klalei klalot habriya, the principles of the general needs of the whole creation. So that everything that falls and everything that lives and everything that dies as well, because a leaf falling is also a leaf dying in a certain sense. It's not just about protecting the worm. Every bird that catches a worm, every worm that makes it to being eaten by a bird, all of this is hashkacha pratit because it all serves the need of creation. And in the original teaching, the Baal Shem Tov emphasizes, and this is also important, this happens even in places where no humans ever go. In the highest mountain, in the deepest valley, where no human ever trods, ever passes by, still God has hashkacha pratit. It's not about how all of this interacts with human beings. So, big picture, everything has hashkacha pratit over it, for the sake of the needs of the whole creation. Specific picture related to animals and its domesticated animals and how we use or abuse animals. When we use other animals, as we use other humans, are we using them for a good sake, a good purpose that's good for them and not just for us? If I use you, if you're my friend and I use you, that sounds like a bad thing, but actually it's not, as long as you know that you're being used in a way that's good and holy and helpful. So most of the way we use animals in our society is about as far from holy as you could imagine, as far from helpful and mutually beneficial as you could imagine. And it has to stop. And there can't be, for me anyway, there can't be any room to like eat a not cage-free egg, for example. And then everyone has to have the question, what line do you want to draw? What amount of carelessness about the needs of the whole creation are you willing to tolerate in order to get your food? And what are you not willing to tolerate? And I think the general goal is that we want to make those lines drawn further and further in so that the amount of actions that are what could be termed intolerable become less and less and less. We're weaning humanity from an addiction, not just to animal eating, but to cruelty, to suffering, etc. In fact, some of the analysis about the rise of fascism in so many countries recently, including America and Israel, is that in fact, it's not just about control or power, but cruelty is actually a purpose of that kind of politics. Its intention is to create cruelty. It thrives off of cruelty. It needs cruelty in order to survive. So we've created a world that essentially nurtures cruelty and needs cruelty to survive. And this is most obvious when we look at the rise of new fascism. But it's also essentially part of the way we live. So the other point I wanted to make is this. We are in the sixth mass extinction. Everyone, I think, who's on this call will acknowledge and know this. Climate change is not the beginning of the sixth mass extinction. The beginning of the sixth mass extinction is farming and hunting. Hunting wiped out a lot of big game, possibly caused massive extinctions in North America. We're not sure. Scientists are not sure how the timing worked between the hunting and the extinction of the large animals. But farming also clearly is taking away habitat from animals. It's killing animals that come to use and eat your crops when you're trying to keep them for yourself or for people or to sell to people or to nourish other people. So you can't have a cruelty-free diet. It doesn't matter how vegan you are, because you are taking land away from other creatures and habitat and cutting them off from that habitat in order to make space for your own needs. And again, the question has to be the meta question, am I serving the needs of the whole creation and not as well as my own needs? Have I found a way to live so that my needs are congruent with the needs of creation, with the needs of life itself, with the needs of the principle of life itself? That's the question that we have to ask about every action, because there is no diet that doesn't have cost, direct cost. So, yes. So those are the things I wanted to share with you. I wondered if people have more thoughts about this, and specifically, I'm interested if anyone has any kind of unique ideas about how to draw those lines so that we are moving in the direction of less cruelty and moving in a direction where we acknowledge, no matter how purist we are, that we have to participate in that cruelty, but at the same time, that gives us the power to try to change it. So, anyone have some thoughts about struggling with those lines?
Okay, actually, due to time constraints, we're going to have to move on.
Want to wait on that?
Fundamental question, how do we reduce cruelty? How do we get the message out? I'm hoping that by restoring and transforming this new year for animals, that will greatly increase awareness and get many more people involved. And if we have time at the end, maybe we can have a little bit of discussion on that and some other issues. And also, everybody has the email addresses, because I've been sending messages out, so feel free to contact David and have ideas on that. But moving on.
Richard, before you do, 1 second, let me just say, people, since we don't have time for that discussion now, put thoughts in the chat so that we can share them.
Okay.
And that would be very much appreciated. And Jeff can make use of that.
Okay.
Thanks, Richard.
Okay. Again, I want to apologize. Last minute, a lot of back and forth. Who's going to be speaking? How do we get more women? I was just rushing, and I forgot one of the most important things to put on headphones. I hope I was heard well enough so that it could be understood at the beginning. So have them on now, and I just forgot. Okay.
We heard you and we hear you. And we
Okay.
always hear you and your message.
So thank you, and same with your messages, and let's hope all our messages will be heard and listened to and move toward a much better world. Okay, moving along, we now have a long-time friend and advisor, Louis Regenstein, and he's been involved in the environmental movement for many years, author of a wonderful, wonderful book called Replenish the Earth, which talks quite a bit about the Bible's teachings on conservation and animals and many other things like that. So Lou, look forward to hearing you next.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, so much and for all your great work. And I'm honored to be included with such a distinguished group of Jewish scholars and leaders and to so much brilliance we're hearing today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Throughout our long and amazing history, the Jewish people have been leaders in many social, scientific, and moral movements that have profoundly affected the world. Today, we face challenges of profound importance, problems that endanger the very survival of humanity and the Jewish people and of our civilization itself. Among these issues is the global environmental crisis, which threatens to overwhelm the Earth's ability to support its very life forms that God created long before humans ever appeared on the scene. And the massive abuse and suffering inflicted on billions of wild and farmed animals every year clearly violate the teachings of Judaism and cannot be justified by any person of faith and decency. And as Richard has pointed out many times, the climate crisis threatens our civilization and our future. So we have to do something about it. Judaism must address these crucial problems, and indeed it does, although it very, very rarely gets preached from the pulpit. As Richard, who is the foremost expert in the world on this subject, has extensively documented, concern for our fellow creatures is set forth in the Torah, the Decalogue, the Talmud, and other wise and righteous teachings of the Almighty and of our revered elders, teachers, and sages, some of which are with us today. From the creation story to the teachings of the prophets and the Psalms, our great and ancient faith repeatedly tells us we have an obligation to care for and protect the planet and its creatures. And Jews can take great pride in our ancient laws and traditions that for thousands of years have mandated compassion and concern for animals and required respectful, responsible stewardship of God's creation. Indeed, Jews are the first people in the world known to have recorded and adopted such teachings. I've made that statement many times. I always expect someone to write in and say, no, it was someone else. So please feel free to do that. No one's ever contradicted me on that. As Richard has said many times, and you, the Jewish people are charged with the mission of being a light unto the nations, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, compassionate children of compassionate ancestors, as well as Shomrei Adamah, guardians of the earth, based on the mandate to work and guard the earth, Genesis 2:15. Often we do not keep in mind or are unaware that Judaism and our holy scriptures have strong laws and teachings forbidding cruelty to animals. Resurrecting our ancient holiday, Rosh Hashanah, Labahamo, the New Year's Day for the animals, would be a very good way to revitalize our great faith tradition and remind our people of our obligations to practice compassion and conservation as set forth in the Torah and other Jewish teachings and literature. Indeed, as has been said earlier, there is an entire code of laws, Tsara B'alei Hayam, the requirement to prevent the suffering of living creatures. An entire code of laws mandating that animals be treated with compassion. Jews are not allowed to pass by an animal in distress or being mistreated even on the Sabbath. As the authoritative Encyclopedia Judaica, the Jewish encyclopedia, observes, in rabbinic literature, great prominence is given to demonstrating God's mercy to animals and to the importance of not causing more pain. It says moral and legal rules on the treatment of animals are based on the principle that animals are part of God's creation, towards which humans bear great responsibility. The Bible makes it clear not only that cruelty to animals is forbidden, but also that compassion and mercy to them are demanded of humans by God. The encyclopedia sums up the rabbinical law by saying the principle of kindness to animals is as though God's treatment of humans will be according to their treatment of animals. I guess we probably shouldn't hope that's right. Similarly, the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia observes the Jewish attitude towards animals has always been governed by the consideration that they too are God's creatures and the obligation to respect and consider the feelings and needs of lower creatures. The non-canonical writings strongly urge kindness towards animals, declaring that one who harms an animal harms his own soul. And it says, as the Holy One, blessed be he, has compassion upon man, so has he compassion upon the beasts of the field and from the birds of the air, which is from the Midrash. Kindness to animals is not only stressed throughout the Bible, it is even required in the holiest of the laws, the Ten Commandments, wherein God forbids us to make our farmed animals work on the Sabbath. We must give them too a day of rest. Indeed, this commandment might constitute the first written record of a law requiring kindness to animals, the first codification of concern for animals, a concept the Jews can be said to have pioneered some 3,500 years ago. In addition to the citations from the Torah and the Bible that Richard has already cited, I want to mention that God's first commandment, Genesis 1:22, was not to humans, that was to the birds, the whales, the fish, and the other creatures, to be fruitful and multiply, and to fill the seas and skies. His first commandment to humans in Genesis 1:28 was to replenish the earth and have dominion over other creatures. Dominion meaning stewardship, kind stewardship, wise stewardship. These commandments concern the welfare and survival of animals and human responsibilities towards them. So the Almighty must have considered this a very important matter. Later, clearly God was well pleased with the works of his creation. After he made each creature in Genesis, he saw that each was good and pronounced the entire creation, when it was completed, to be very good, because a wonderful functioning ecosystem had been established of God's creation. Later, when God promised Noah and generations to come never again to destroy the earth with a flood, he included in the covenant every living creature, the fowl, the cattle, and every beast on earth. Genesis chapter 9. And Psalm 104 extols the creatures of this great and wide sea. O Lord, how manifold are thy works, in wisdom hast thou made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. The glory of the Lord shall endure forever. Psalm 36 states, man and beast thou savest, O Lord, how precious is thy steadfast love. The obligation of humans to respect and protect the natural environment is another theme that appears throughout the Bible, often referring to just the kind of problems we face today: the destruction of wildlife and habitat, the pollution of our food, air, and water, climate change. And we don't have time to go into all those, but the Bible is full of that. To summarize, the many teachings of Judaism over the centuries have repeatedly stressed the mitzvah of compassion for other creatures. Thus, a renewed emphasis on the humane ethic would represent not a departure from traditional Jewish teachings, but a return to them. Sadly, the long tradition of raising animals gently and humanely is largely forgotten in many ways. Who now talks about or remembers the story of the Slovakian farmer and Holocaust victim Itzhak Rosenberg, who, while being taken away to be killed by the Germans, cried out to his neighbors, "But who will take care of my animals?" Today, our activities threaten the existence of entire species of wildlife and of the Earth's great critical biological life support systems essential to our own survival. Therefore, destroying God's creation, causing massive suffering to and wiping out other life forms and our own habitat, the earth itself must be viewed as sinful and self-destructive behavior. And I wish, as Richard has tried time and again, the rabbis would preach this from the pulpit. This must be avoided, especially by those of us who go to almost unimaginable lengths to avoid violating the most obscure Jewish laws, especially those relating to the Sabbath, while ignoring the entire code of laws protecting animals. The Lord has instructed us in chapter 9 of Genesis that every beast of the earth and every fowl of the air and all that moveth upon the earth and all the fishes of the sea, into your hand are they delivered. Today, every Jew should consider the massive damage humans are doing to the planet and its creatures, especially the cruelty inflicted on wildlife and farmed animals. We should ask, is this how the Lord intended for us to treat the creation, which the Lord declared very good and over which we were given stewardship? Is this what a kind and compassionate Lord would want? It is hard to imagine that our massive abuse of animals would be pleasing to a merciful God, and that this could truly be his will. As the great Jewish writer and Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer once wrote, how can we pray to God for mercy when we ourselves have no mercy? And so I say to all of you, Happy New Year. Thank you for your brilliance and your great work. And may we all work to make this a better world for us, for the animals, and for generations to come, whose future depends on the decisions we make today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, for the opportunity to.
No, our pleasure. Many thanks for the many valuable Torah teachings and stories, and again, best wishes for much success. Okay, the next speaker will be Rabbi Dr. Abraham Staff, sorry, and I've just gotten to know him very recently, and hope to really get to know him much more. He's the author of a number of halakhic books. Most important, most recent is that on Jewish vegetarianism, unfortunately in Hebrew, and hopefully we can get it translated. Very, very important. And in addition, he teaches at the Shaarei Zion Beit Midrash for City of Rabbinic Studies, and is a kosher critic in the Israeli newspaper Akor Rishon. So look forward, Abraham, to hear your talk.
Everybody, first of all, I must say I'm really excited to see all of you because as a Hebrew writer in Israel, I'm not aware of the extent of the activity and writing on these issues in English, in America. So it's really exciting. And when Richard told me about this initiation, about the Jewish New Year for animals, I was surprised because when I thought about the Jewish calendar and the animal rights, I could think about many other days on this calendar, which I personally maybe would choose one of them, because I could think about, for example, Shavuot. Shavuot is a very good date because in Shavuot we don't eat meat during the night of Shavuot because the people of Israel didn't receive the Torah yet, so they were not allowed, according to some midrashim, to eat meat before they received the Torah, and so we are not allowed to eat meat on the night of Shavuot. Or maybe we could choose 9 days, the 9 first days on Chodesh Av, in which we don't eat meat, because we are mourning the temple, but the deep idea behind this minhag is that we are not allowed to eat meat after we lost the temple and the korbanot and the sacrifices and the special conditions which allowed us to eat meat, and now they expired, and we all have to be sort of a vegetarian after the destruction of the temple. And I could think about many other dates, maybe the Parashat Bereshit, Shabbat Parashat Bereshit, when we read about Adam and Eve, that were not allowed to eat meat. And then I thought about this choice of Rosh Chodesh Elul, which is the Rosh Hashanah of Maaser Behemah, the Rosh Hashanah, the time in the year that a man, an owner of a flock, needs to take 1/10 of his flock and make it a korban, and sacrifice it in Jerusalem. And I think it's really a very important day, not in the animal rights movement, but in the general and in animal rights movement. But it's a very special and unique date in the eyes and the perspectives of the Jewish vegetarianism. That was the name I called my book, because I think that Jewish vegetarianism has a special point of view in which the sacrificing, the offering is really not contradiction to vegetarianism, but a way, a step in the way into a vegetarianism and veganism and other point of view and other way of using and relating the world, the animals and other creatures. And this date has a special occasion between two yortzites. We are now 2 days out before the yortzeit of Rav Kook, that we all know about his vision of vegetarianism and peace, and we are 2 days after the yortzeit of Rav David HaKohen, Rav HaNazir, which was the disciple of Rav Kook and implemented his teaching. Anyway, is one of the most significant Jewish vegetarians rabbis, and they both wrote about the connection between the sacrifices and vegetarianism. And the Midrash says that Noach was permitted to eat meat only after he offered the sacrifice. After Noach sacrificed some of his animals, he was permitted to eat meat for himself. And I think that what the Torah tries to teach us is, first of all, not looking at eating animals as something that is obvious. That's something that one can just do it without thinking. And the demand to sacrifice 1/10 of your flock and take it to the temple, it tells you that this is not something that you can do without thinking, eating animals. It's something that is part of your Avodat Hashem, of your relations with God. There is a term that Rav Eliyahu Kitov used. He said that we are all eating from the leftovers of God, because in Hebrew it says shiarei korban. It's a term which says that we are all eating from the table of God. I think that's a good starting point, and it's a good date for Rosh Hashanah, for a starting point that first of all tells you not to eat meat without thinking, without using it for higher goals, and then when one is starting to look at the animals as creatures of God, and when one starts to think about what he's eating and what he's putting on his plate, so that's the first starting point, and from that one can change his whole relations with the creatures of God. So Happy New Year.
Okay, yeah, Shana Tova, thank you very much, and wish you much success with that book, and hopefully we'll find a way to translate it into English so we can get a much better audience. Okay, the next speaker was going to be Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, but evidently he got some kind of message and he's called away, so hopefully we'll hear from him again sometime in the future. So we're going to move on instead to Yossi Wolfson. And Yossi's been an animal rights advocate in in Israel for many, many years. He's been super helpful. And by the way, you all owe much appreciation because he's hosting this. He set up the link, and we're recording it. We'll get it out to you and hopefully sharing it with many more people. And he's the coordinator of the International Jewish Vegetarian Society, the Jerusalem chapter. So many, many thanks, Yossi, for hosting this and all your wonderful work for many, many years.
Thank you, and excuse me for my non-native English. In Richard's presentation, the title was Rosh Hashanah LeBaalei Chayim, an idea whose time has come. And I want to comment a little bit about this idea that its time has come, and put another perspective to one way to see it is that we are reclaiming Rosh Hashanah LeBehemah from the Mishnah and putting new ideas into it, and I want to give another perspective, which is not contradictory, but is complementary. Judaism is many times in popular literature accused of the creation of dominionism, of putting human beings above animals, and creating the idea that humans are allowed to use animals. But when we think about it, we need to see the context, the economic context on the background of which the Jewish teachings that we know of the time of the Bible, time of the Gemara, Mishnah, etc., was written. And the context is traditional farming, where people actually dominated animals and controlled them, but in a way that is very, very different from today. They lived with the animals, they knew the animals, and the animals had some kind of individual autonomy in terms of having to collect their food by themselves. They had certain control over their lives. And I think that the important novelty in Jewish teachings is taking this reality of animal exploitation and turning it to be more compassionate, putting some respect to these individual animals into the existing economic system where Judaism was, or those Jewish teachings were developed. And when we take all of these teachings to today's reality, the contradiction, or maybe not even contradiction, they just cannot live with this reality. They don't communicate with our reality. When we look at the slaughterhouse chain of this assembly line, the mechanistic way that slaughterhouses work, the huge numbers, and we compare it to slaughter as people at the time of the Bible or the Gemara knew, it is just not the same notion. It is not the same thing. It is same word, but it is totally different. When we look at Rosh Hashanah Labehema, it was created with a background of people that and agriculture that still works with the natural seasonal cycle, and it is in Rosh Chodesh Elul, on the 1st of Elul, because people knew that after the 1st of Elul, probably no more kids will be born, no more calves will be born. How different it is from today's dairy industry, for example, where kids and calves are born all around the year according to the needs and the manipulation that we did with the animals. So when we try to take these old Jewish teachings and try to implement them in today's reality, there's an in principle notional linguistic problem in doing it, and the values around us that grew during 19th century, 20th century are values that objectify animals totally, like behaviorism, trying to be, and there's some new skepticism about animals' emotions, animal feelings, animal subjectivity, which we never knew before in history. And now I come to our economic context and why this is an idea whose time has come. The context that Richard talked about of the climate crisis and the environmental crisis. These make an existential necessity, existential in the meaning that if we want to survive, we need to move away from animal-based foods. This is what the IPCC says. Any scenario that will keep this world below 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial times, any such scenario includes a huge shift of diet away from animal foods. And the environmental crisis and the climate crisis also put us in a different economic relation or survival relation with other animals. We suddenly share the fate and we share the existential threat with all other animals. And in this background, I think that if we take the same value that in biblical times were interpreted into compassionate dominionism, and we put them in the context that we are in here now, the same values would translate to something much more of what we today like to call biocentric or ecocentric behavior, and going away from just being exploitative but compassionate to sharing the earth with the animals and trying to repair the damages that we cause both to us and to them. And here this Rosh Hashanah LeBaalei Chaim is not just reclaiming something and putting new values, but putting the same values in our current economic and survival context. Thank you, and Chodesh Tov.
Okay, Chodesh Tov, Shana Tova. Many, many thanks again for hosting this and your many, many years of activism, and best wishes for continued success. Okay, last but far, far, far from least is Jonathan Wolf, and he's been involved for many, many years. He's the founding president of Jewish Vegetarians in North America, and he was a pioneer in promoting Tu B'Shvat Seders. I attended some of them in his home. I was fortunate to attend, of course, many, many years ago in Judaism and Vegetarianism in Lincoln Square Synagogue. It's been very helpful in editing some of my books. And he's also involved in promoting this idea of restoring and transforming the ancient Jewish New Year for animals. So I put him last, well, partly because of the alphabet, but also think he can sum up things, summarize, conclude. So look forward to your talk, Jonathan. By the way, we can't see you, and know if you want to.
The stuff is going on in my apartment and stuff. Okay.
I
unmuted, but I want to. It's hard to. Anyway,
okay.
But I can see all of you guys. Yasher Koach, and thank you, Richard, for promoting this idea and everything you've done for many years for all of these related causes. And this was wonderful Torah from many great teachers. You're right that we do have to make sure to make a special emphasis in the future to make sure that the half of the Jewish people is more fully represented. And I know you tried very hard to get women teachers, and Sarah did a great job. And next time and in the past we've had. Anyway, I participated in the Zooms that Richard's done the last few years for this purpose. And a year or two ago, I presented a table sephardim of what might go into a ceremony, a service, Seders are overused. The Sephardim have a Leil Rosh Hashanah Seder, the Kabbalas V'Svad had a Tu B'Shvat Seder, and we all do a Pesach Seder, and people make Seders for all kinds of purposes. So, but for the ceremony, the celebration, the occasion of dedicating Rosh Chodesh Elul to being the Rosh Hashanah L'Behemot, I've been working in the 70s over several years. I had every Tu B'Shvat more sources, more analysis, more translation. And finally, in 1979, I think I produced a copy of a Tu B'Shvat Seder text, which many people still use. In 2019, Rabbi Daniel Landis of Pardes and now of Yashrut sent me an email while I was at a conference for, I guess, Limud for that weekend, and said, I just pulled out the Seder that you taught to members of my congregation in Los Angeles in the 80s, and 30 years later, it's still relevant and applicable. So I'm trying to go through the same process in developing and sharpening and focusing a ceremony, a celebration, an event for Rosh Chodesh Elul, which, as we did with Tu B'Shvat Seder, could be used widely and appreciated and enrich our Jewish lives. As several of the wonderful teachers have already said, the first Mishnah in the Tractate Rosh Hashanah says there are 4 New Years in the Jewish year. Of course, what we call Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishrei, the first of Nisan, which the Torah says, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim. Nisan is the first of the months. So Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is for counting years. Nisan is for counting months and also reigns of kings and sometimes queens. And Rosh Chodesh Shvat, according to Beit Shammai, Tu B'Shvat, according to Beit Hillel, is the new year for the legal purposes, a fiscal year of tree fruits for different kinds of orla and tithes and other purposes. And the fourth one that nobody ever talks about until we tried to start alerting people to it in the last few years is Rosh Chodesh Elul for animals. In that time, as Richard said and others said before, it was for different kinds of purposes of sacrifices and tithing. But now, just as the Kabbalists of Tzfat did hundreds of years ago, and we've developed in recent decades, Tu B'Shvat as a celebration of Eretz Yisrael, of Zionism, of nature, of trees and fruits, we now are trying to do the same thing with this holiday as a Rosh Hashanah L'Bahema. And so I'm trying to follow the process that we replicate in some ways the process that we were doing through the 70s and 80s of developing different kinds of seders for Tu B'Shvat, and I have copies of dozens that different people wrote and published at that time. And so I wrote that table of contents a couple of years ago. I haven't yet put together and duplicated what I'm going to be leading in my apartment tonight for Rosh Hashanah for this occasion, but I know what the books are, what the sources are, what the texts are that it's coming from. So very quickly, let me run through what I think ought to be the kind of event that we could have every year on this occasion to dedicate and celebrate and commemorate and recognize our fellow creatures, the members of the animal world, who are also have their own unique relationship with God. And we need to, as several of the speakers have wonderfully said, be aware and compassionate and attentive to the needs of animals and to our relationship with them and to their relationship directly with the divine. So quickly, what I'm putting together for tonight and outlined a couple of years ago, and I'm trying to, as I did with Tu B'Shvat in the 70s, every year focus and refine and find new materials and copy them. First, I think when we get together for this occasion, we should talk about Elul. We should talk about the fact that this is the first day of the 40-day period of Tshuva of the month of Elul, which is meant to be reflective and bring us to compassion and repentance and self-examination through the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and some people take it even through the end of Hoshana Rabbah. So we could talk about lots of different teachings of what Elul means and what the significance of the month is. Then the significance of Rosh Chodesh. There's a Rosh Chodesh at the beginning of every month. So why, Rosh Chodesh is a biblical holiday. Some of the prophets say, you Israelites who are behaving badly, do work, open your markets and do your work on the Sabbath and the new moon. And we don't think of the new moon as a particularly important central holiday, but it certainly was then. It certainly is laid out very clearly in the Torah and in the Nevi'im, and in the Siddur. We have the special Psalm of Barchi Nafshi. We have the special addition to the Birkat Hamazon and the Amidah of Ya'aleh V'yavo. So we should talk about the meaning of Rosh Chodesh every month and how it specially resonates at the beginning of this month. And then there's a bunch of issues, a bunch of texts, a bunch of sources that many people have mentioned parts of in this wonderful presentation. And let me just tick through them quickly that I think should be part of any Rosh Chodesh Elul celebration and commemoration and activity. One is, as Lewis and many other people have very articulately talked about, Tzar Baalei Chaim, that we are obligated and commanded by the Torah to take special attention and care and worry about the suffering of animals. So that creates a certain obligation and a relationship of people with animals and of people with animals with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Another is the wonderful medieval book Perek Shirah, which has poems in Hebrew about the holiness and uniqueness and qualities of many, many different animals and birds. And we could print some of those in the text of our celebration for this event. Then there's a covenant in both in the Torah and in the prophets. God says, I am making a covenant with you and with the animal queendom. So there's a sense in which we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Isaiah, that God expects commitments and obligations and relationship and connection and reciprocity from human beings and also from animals. And as Yossi and others talked about, what happens in the course of the book of Genesis, that Adam and Eve are put in the Garden of Eden of Dala Shomra, and the trees, you can eat pieces of the trees. They don't, they're all entirely edible. and you're not allowed to do harm and damage. And then eventually when the flood comes and when Noah and his children proceed through, then meat eating is permitted. But when I used to teach that course starting in the 1970s, Richard, about Judaism and vegetarianism, we would study those verses very carefully. And what happens after the flood is really tragic and dangerous and horrifying. That the rabbis interpret one of the verses to refer to abortion, the Adam Be'Adam, that all kinds of violence enters the world after the fall of human beings after the flood. And that's when the permission is given, though the sources that we hold by, like Albo and Rav Kook, believe it's a permission that is reluctant and hesitant and caged and hedged, but the permission to eat meat. And at that time, all of a sudden, people and animals damaging and harming and killing each other becomes a scary issue. Several people have talked about extinction of species. We live in a time where in the last century, dozens and dozens of creatures have gone out of existence. And the Orach Chaim commentary says that the mitzvah of Otovet B'no, that you can't kill a cow or bull and its child on the same day, especially a cow, is because of the preservation of species, that makes sure that we don't wipe out too many animals at a time. And in our lives and our parents and grandparents' lives, we've been wiping out dozens of irreplaceable species. So I think that's something we need to talk about and learn about and worry about on this occasion of Rosh Chodesh Elul, Rosh Hashanah L'Behemah. Then, as many people have talked about climate and the ways in which eating and producing meat, as Richard very eloquently discussed at length, despoils the world and makes it unlivable potentially, God forbid, for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And our mistreatment of animals contributes to that, to deforestation, to carbon dioxide. And animals are among the biggest victims. Think of what's happening right now in Hawaii, that in Maui, there's all kinds of terrible fires, and some of the worst suffering goes on in the animal world. So climate is intimately connected with our interaction with animals. A couple more issues: factory farming, which several people have talked about, and Sarah talked about what happens at Pearlstein and at Isabella Friedman, where they try to use foods, even eggs, even meat, that is produced in a more sustainable and compassionate way, because factory farming is bad for the people and the land and the air and the water and the air. So that's something I think we should focus on and think about on this occasion. Vegetarianism, almost all of you have spoken beautifully about. And again, I started the North American Jewish Vegetarian Society in 1975, the same year I conducted my first Tu B'Shvat Seder. And to me, Pshita, I mean, why, maybe Rabbi Seidenberg talked about Shabbat and Yom Tov, but I've always said to people, there's some issue and inyan and notion of some benefit or some elevation that happens for eating meat on Shabbat and Yom Tov. I myself haven't eaten meat since the early 70s, and dairy products since the early 2000s. But trying to figure out what I was getting to. Vegetarian idea is that we are partners with God in the world, and we have to preserve the lives of our fellow creatures. And if, we as the Midrash Kohelet Rabbah says, if we despoil the world, there's nobody to come after. And the production and eating of meat contributes to the despoiling of the world, as several speakers have eloquently said today. A couple of more issues. One of them is people's relationship with pets. I've never been a big companion animal fan. I don't like so much having animals running around in my house, but many people do. And many people, it's a very important, crucial emotional relationship for them. And many people with different kinds of physical disabilities and mental disabilities, having a companion animal or a service animal or an animal, a therapy animal, is crucially important. So I think we need to talk about that on this occasion. Then I think we should sing some songs. I've developed lots of songs for Tu B'Shvat from all kinds of Jewish sources and others, and from the Tanakh. And I've created ceremonies and celebrations for things like Jewish Thanksgiving, where we've pulled together Jewish songs and American songs. I'm not sure exactly, other than Old MacDonald, I'm not exactly sure what classic American music. There's Sanson, there's Peter and the Wolf, there's All God's Children Got, what's the end of the so what is it, Richard? I can't remember. Anyway, there are some classic songs and classical music and famous folk songs that touch on animals. The last thing I want to talk about quickly is tzedakah. What I'm going to ask people when I have them in my apartment tonight is to contribute to organizations that support and promote these causes that I think are embodied in this holiday. We know that, sorry, I got to find my proper pad for this. Nina Nadelson created the organization Chai, concerned for helping animals in Israel, which is very important. Alex Hershaft created Farm, which used to be the Farm Animal Reform Movement, and now is the Farm Animal Rights Movement. There are different organizations working to prevent climate destruction. One of them is Dayenu, which I think is doing great work, although I think they have a bad name. The meaning of Dayenu at the Pesach Seder is, this would have been enough if we'd stopped there. I think if they want to have a Hebrew word that means, no, stop, don't keep doing that, something like Sof Pasuk or Sof Davar, Ad Kan, or Maspik Kvar. But Dayenu doesn't mean what they're using it to mean, but they do wonderful work. And there are organizations working on species issues, on factory farming issues, on the American Society for Protection of Nature in Israel and Long Island does wonderful work with the Chevra Haganat Teva in Israel. And of course, the Jewish Veg Group. So those are the kinds of causes I'm going to ask people to give to or send to or link to tonight. And I think we should all work together to study, to celebrate, to sing, to learn, to eat vegan food, and to raise the consciousness of our fellow Jews and all fellow human beings of our obligations to, our debt to, and our inextricable relationship with our fellow animal creatures.
Okay, wonderful. A lot of good ideas. Look forward to you writing some of that up so it can be widely shared. And best wishes for much hatzlacha with your We Are for Animals event this evening. And I want to thank everybody. Sorry we went a bit over time. I was hoping to keep it an hour and a half, but I hope we'll all stay in touch. And again, this is the most critical issue in the world, as we see every day in the headlines. So is what's happening. And unfortunately, Israel is probably threatened far more than most other countries because the whole Mediterranean area is heating up far faster than the average for the world. And being a small country and they're projecting we're going to be hotter and drier here in Israel, and that makes terrorism and violence more likely. And God forbid the Mediterranean rising and rising. They say could be more than 3 feet by the middle of the century, over 8 feet by the end of the century. And of course, that could be disastrous in the world. So, wish everybody Shana Tova, Chodesh Tov, and let's stay in touch and let's change the world. So, Shalom from Israel.